Now, earlier, I spoke to Kurt Volker, who served as Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine during his first administration, and he gave me his assessment of this back and forth between the American and Ukrainian presidents over the past few days.
I think they reflect a degree of pique because Zelensky has been pushing back on a few things that the president wanted, I think quite reasonably so. The minerals deal, for instance, that Trump offered was incredibly one-sided and open-ended. So Zelensky has been pushing back a bit. But that being said, I'm not sure yet whether this is really damaging or not. It depends on whether we can get back to the substance at hand. Yeah. The atmospherics and the emotions are bad, but there's a war going on. President Trump says he wants to end the war. That means convincing Putin it's not worth it. And we got to end up in a situation where you have a sovereign and independent and secure Ukraine at the end. That means we have to deter future Russian attacks. And we need our European allies to help with that. So that's the substance. If we can get back to that, it's unfortunate to have these outbursts, but hopefully we get back there.
Yeah, we though have seen, haven't we, how the president's remarks have been seized on gratefully by the Kremlin and by Vladimir Putin's supporters as a vindication to the world of Russia's position. That is a significant development, isn't it?
It is. It certainly is, because everyone in the world knows that the facts of that are the opposite of what Trump said. If there's a dictator in the room, it's Vladimir Putin. He's been in power for 25 years and has orchestrated sham elections. If there is a democracy in the room, it's Ukraine. They had to suspend elections because they're being attacked by Russia. And no, Ukraine did not start this war. Russia attacked Ukraine.
I mean, we have seen then that the European leaders, friends of Ukraine, coming closer together after what happened at the Munich conference and after what seems to be happening following the president's comments. But I guess that may be the effect. It can't be described as the intention.
Well, I think President Trump has been very clear that he wants Europe to do more on defense. He wants countries to spend 5% of GDP. He wants them to take the lead in providing security assurances for Ukraine. So that's clearly the intent. Now, the methodology, whether there's a direct lineage there between this kind of assertive and aggressive policy and behavior, or whether it's just coincidental, but it is certainly what Trump is hoping for, and it's good to see that at least there was some attempt made by the French-hosted meeting to do that. It didn't get anywhere, so more has yet to be done. We
could be looking at an example of the ends justifying the means, even inadvertently.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say justified, but it is certainly. I think of this situation as kind of like water that needs to go downhill. There may be lots of things in the way, but ultimately it gets to the bottom. And here, the bottom is a ceasefire in Ukraine, a deterrent to future Russian attacks, and greater burden sharing by Europe. That's where I think we end up. It's just a rocky road getting there.
Yeah, look, we've seen just today, Russia, the Kremlin, is rejecting the notion of any multinational force in Ukraine overseeing the peace, if there is a peace. What are your thoughts on that? Is that any reason why it should be seen then as some kind of Russian veto?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I don't see why Russia gets a say over this.
Yeah.
Russia is the one that's been attacking Ukraine. If they can agree to stop that, that's a good thing. There might be some kind of parking this in a way that, from a legalistic perspective, we don't see a renewal of hostilities. But that doesn't mean that Russia gets a veto over a sovereign and independent Ukraine or the decisions and relationships that it carves out with friends and allies.
Does that imply that if, and this is a hypothetical, America, Pete Hegseth and President Trump say, look, we will just not back up any security guarantee in Ukraine, then European friends of Ukraine should do it anyway, or at least try?
I think that more realistically, you would have European leadership on the ground in such an operation, but you would still want to have some American enablers and some American backup support.
Yeah.
But as long as the European leadership is clear, I think that still might be achievable.
Yeah. Well, does that also then imply that it couldn't happen without that basic American support? It just would not be feasible in your view?
Well, I think Europeans might be capable without the American support, maybe not as capable, but still sufficient. But certainly everybody will want the American participation. And I think in terms of the symbol, the signal that it sends to Vladimir Putin that this is serious and don't restart the war, I think American participation will be critical.
Tell me, what do you make of the president saying just a matter of hours ago that Russia hold the cards? Because it is true, isn't it, that Russia has suffered enormous losses in Ukraine and enormous economic harm. And you'd imagine they would not likely choose to carry on fighting given what they've suffered so far and would continue to suffer.
I think what President Trump is referring to is that Russia has a bigger population, bigger economy, can throw more meat into the grinder, if you will, and can potentially continue to fight this war. That being said, just think back a few days ago when he was thrown a question about Russian forces, and he said they're not doing very well. Or on his first day in office, he said the Russian economy is failing, and he's going to do Putin a favor by ending the war, and that if he doesn't, he has no choice but to escalate with sanctions. So President Trump seems to be, as a classic negotiator, doing a bit of push and a bit of pull, where trying to put some pressure on Russia to say you need to end this, but then dangle some carrots that would go along with them if they did end the war. And then this episode with getting mad at Zelensky just seems to have interrupted that.
Yeah, a word on sanctions. President Trump's team seem pretty clearly open to the possibility of lifting sanctions or easing sanctions on Russia. But as the Times newspaper argues today, what about the argument for continuing to use sanctions as leverage while maybe demanding reparations for the harm that's been done by Russia and the atrocities committed by Russia?
Yeah. So I was very pleased to see Marco Rubio's statement after the Saudi Arabia meeting, where he said sanctions would not be lifted before there is a peace settlement. And that is certainly the minimum that needs to be achieved to consider lifting sanctions, in my view. But as you say, that may not be enough. Reparations is a key thing. But if we could see Europe finally seize the 300 billion in Russian assets, use some of that to buy weapons for Ukraine and others to help with rebuilding, that's at least a start. But Europe has gotten nowhere close to that decision yet either.
No, they've been wrangling about that. And would the United States, would Washington go along with it, even if Europe decided to go there?
I think so. If it's other people's money, I don't think Trump would have a problem with it. It's spending American taxpayer money he doesn't want to do.
No, that's a pretty clear answer. Look, there's been damage to trust between the United States, traditionally the leader of the Western Alliance, and members of NATO and the alliance on the other side of the Atlantic. I think it's difficult to deny that. Is it repairable, do you think, Kurt?
I think so. We've been through a lot as an alliance. Remember the Vietnam War, remember the Iraq War, remember 1968. We've been through a lot. We get through these things. Trump's style right now is very disruptive for NATO. NATO allies don't like it. But ultimately, I think it remains a fundamental shared interest of the United States and Europe to have a security alliance. I also believe it's fundamental that we get Ukraine into that, because that will strengthen the capacities of Europe and it will create the best deterrent. Yeah. But this is something that will have to play out over a longer period of time.
Well. Therefore, is the damage that's been done repairable while Donald Trump is president?
If he wants to, I'm sure he could. I don't know that that's his normal modus operandi to go.
I sense you rather doubt that it's repairable while he's in the White House.
I don't think it's going to be a priority of his. I think his priority is to get Europe to do more. That's his only thing. It's the burden sharing side of it. The rest of it, I think it's not going to be his priority, but it'll be an interest of the United States, and future presidents will probably put more emphasis on that.
Next week, we're going to be seeing the British Prime Minister and the French President in Washington, in the White House. Do you have high hopes of those meetings being fruitful?
I was very glad to read today that they are doing that. With this administration, the only decision maker is President Trump. He's the one calling the shots. Everybody else, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, Keith Kellogg, whomever, they're going to be reporting back to him and Trump is going to be deciding what to do next. So it's very important for them to actually go there and meet with him personally and describe the situation. And I think the most important thing that they can do is articulate Europe's willingness to play a leading role in security assurances for Ukraine. So if Trump can get a fair ceasefire, then Europe can step in and prevent the future wars. And they would do so with some American support, but they wouldn't need the U.S. to play the leading role. That would be a very strong message to convey.
All right. And as of right now, are you optimistic about that kind of positive outcome?
I am optimistic that that's what they're going to come and do. I thought that both the British and the French statements in advance of the Paris meeting that they are willing to contribute troops to such an operation were very helpful. In the end of the day, President Trump wants to see the war ended. He wants there to be a sovereign and independent Ukraine, and he wants to be able to move on from this to deal with other issues. So he has an interest in getting this settled.
Yeah. Last question, just for you. And speaking personally, when you saw what Donald Trump has been saying over the past and written over the past 24 hours, did you find that personally painful as an American?
Well, yes, a little bit, because I've worked on these issues with Ukraine for so long. I know the situation there very, very well. One of the things that struck me was his comment that Ukraine is a destroyed country. It's a battle zone. Cities are on their sides. It is so far from the truth that it is a beautiful country. Everything is working. It's very dynamic. I'm going there this weekend. It is far from just being a destroyed country. And we need to make sure it doesn't become a destroyed country at the hands of Russian forces.
So it was painful. Was it also embarrassing?
Well, it's unnecessary. It's just we as I was saying earlier.
Well, it didn't have to happen. What did you find? Did you find it embarrassing? I'm just curious on that.
Because I didn't make the statement, so it doesn't embarrass me.
No.
but it is the wrong kind of statement to be making because it is just not reflective of the reality, and it is creating a wedge between the U.S. and our allies and Ukrainians when we need to be working together. It is giving encouragement to Russia when we ought to be putting pressure on Putin. So it's an own goal, as you would say in the U.K.
That's Kurt Volker, who served as Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine during his first presidential administration. Talking to me just before we came on air.